The Second World War left behind more than ruins, casualties, and shifting borders. It left behind questions, sealed files, and unexplained absences that whisper through the archives of defeated empires and triumphant victors alike. Beneath the celebrated victories and recorded defeats lie reports buried under layers of secrecy, where entire convoys vanish into the icy fog of the Baltic without leaving wreckage, where Gestapo files reference medical trials too brutal to withstand daylight, where whispers of wolf insignias and hidden vaults echo from the Carpathians, and where U-boats marked as sunk may have instead slipped quietly into neutral harbours, carrying secrets no tribunal would ever disclose. The story of the war, as written for public consumption, is one of liberation and justice, but beneath the surface there is another narrative, one traced in erased documents, redacted testimonies, and declassified reports released decades too late. These shadows speak of operations with names deliberately chosen to obscure their intent, of prisoners erased from camp rolls, of engineers and doctors whose fates diverged from the justice of Nuremberg, and of weapons and treasures meant for a war that was supposed to have ended, but perhaps never truly did. These are not tales of open battlefields or honored medals. They are the unresolved entries in intelligence ledgers, marked with phrases like missing in action, special assignment, or simply classified. They remind us that history is not always written by the victors. It is often rewritten, censored, and hidden, leaving us to assemble fragments of the forbidden past still locked in silence. Chapter 1: The Vanishing Convoy of Operation Hannibal. In January 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing under the combined pressure of Soviet advances from the east and Allied bombings from the west. Amid this chaos, Gross Admiral Karl Dönitz authorized Operation Hannibal, the desperate evacuation of German civilians, wounded soldiers, and officials across the Baltic Sea. It was the largest seaborne evacuation in history, dwarfing even Dunkirk, involving more than 1,000 vessels ranging from warships to fishing boats. The frozen waters off Gottenhafen, modern-day Gdynia, Poland, became the backdrop for a humanitarian catastrophe concealed beneath the official records. While the sinking of the Wilhelm Gustloff by Soviet submarine S-13 is remembered as the deadliest maritime disaster of all time, with over 9,000 lost, little is said of Convoy Group 550, a formation of transports and escorts that vanished entirely in February 1945. Their disappearance is preserved only in fragments. A Kriegsmarine signal marked urgent, decrypted by Bletchley Park, noting loss of radio contact. A Soviet fleet log stating no torpedo engagements, and a classified British naval intelligence memorandum sealed for decades. The convoy's documented departure was from Pillau, East Prussia, on the night of February 10th. Weather conditions were brutal, with ice floes and dense fog limiting visibility. Approximately 5,000 civilians and wounded troops were aboard 4 transport ships, escorted by 2 destroyers and 3 U-boats. Their intended route toward Kiel was marked in Kriegsmarine charts, yet no survivors or wreckage were recovered along the expected corridor. The most chilling entry is from Kriegsmarine KTB War Diary, 11th February, noting, Convoy 550, diverted by order of OKM, Oberkommando der Marine. Cargo priority, Sonderfracht. Sonderfracht translates as special freight, a term usually reserved for gold reserves, advanced weapons prototypes, or intelligence archives. The notation was later struck through with black ink, as if deliberately censored. Bletchley Park's decrypted Enigma traffic revealed British analysts questioning the sudden disappearance. A February 15th memorandum from Naval Section Codebreaking, now partially declassified, includes the phrase, "No distress signals intercepted. Convoy may have deviated. Cargo not specified. File marked most secret." Why such emphasis on a single convoy amid dozens of chaotic evacuations? Some historians point to the involvement of U-boat U-234, known to have carried uranium oxide intended for Japanese allies. Could Convoy 550 have been transporting similar materials, hidden among refugees as cover? Yet unlike U-234, which surrendered to US forces in May 1945, Convoy 550 was never accounted for. The Baltic, though treacherous, rarely consumes ships without leaving evidence. Floating debris, lifeboats, oil slicks. Here, there was nothing. Eyewitness testimony is scarce, but not absent. A civilian survivor evacuated on a separate vessel recalled seeing searchlights flash in the fog, followed by muffled detonations. Another described rumors among sailors that the convoy had been ordered toward Denmark but diverted south. Post-war interrogations of captured Kriegsmarine officers hint at unlogged diversions for transports carrying sensitive cargo. One such officer, Oberleutnant zur See Friedrich Mertens, told British interrogators in May 1946 that a special convoy departed Gottenhafen under escort, ordered to proceed beyond designated waters. Cargo highly valuable, destination not disclosed. Crews sworn to secrecy. His testimony was dismissed as unreliable, and his file was later lost in Admiralty archives. Soviet records are equally ambiguous. Naval logs from the Baltic Fleet's submarine command contain no claims of sinking Convoy 550. Captain Alexander Marinesco, celebrated for sinking the Wilhelm Gustloff and General von Steuben, never mentioned an engagement in his post-war interrogations. Soviet internal reports, however, reveal curiosity about a missing German convoy. A declassified 1957 KGB memo, preserved in the Lubyanka archive, refers cryptically to German transports lost without trace, suspected removal of special cargo to neutral ports. Further surveillance requested. Which neutral ports? At the time, Spain and Argentina were notorious safe havens for fleeing Nazis. It is plausible that Convoy 550 diverted to a rendezvous with Spanish-flagged ships, transferring sensitive material destined for South America. Theories proliferate. One possibility is deliberate scuttling. With Soviet forces advancing, high-value materials, uranium, radar prototypes, intelligence archives, might have been sunk to prevent capture. Yet no wrecks have been discovered, despite extensive sonar mapping of the Baltic in recent decades. Another theory points to clandestine Allied interception. Could British submarines or aircraft have ambushed the convoy, removing cargo and silencing survivors to avoid diplomatic complications? Official Royal Navy records deny such action, but unexplained gaps in patrol logs for February 1945 remain suspicious. The darkest speculation revolves around covert agreements made in the war's final months. There are persistent rumors of back-channel negotiations between SS officials and Allied intelligence, particularly concerning advanced weapons research. Heinrich Himmler himself authorized contacts with the Western Allies, hoping to save his life and bargain for a separate peace. If Convoy 550 carried documentation of secret projects, V-weapons, jet aircraft, or even atomic research, it would explain why its trail was deliberately erased. Some files suggest Dönitz's staff discussed last convoys west with cargo for the future. Cargo for whom? Cargo for what? Post-war West German investigators attempted to locate the wrecks in the 1960s. Divers from the Bundesmarine conducted surveys in suspected areas but reported only scattered wreckage, unrelated to Convoy 550. Survivors, families demanded answers, but the government insisted the convoy was lost to enemy action despite Soviet denials. Meanwhile, Argentine archives contain hints of unusual German arrivals in early 1945, ships docking at Buenos Aires with passengers lacking standard papers. One such document, filed under Argentine Naval Intelligence Report 1946-12, mentions 4 unidentified vessels docking under cover of night, offloaded crates under guard of men speaking German. Official inquiry suppressed, the silence surrounding Convoy 550 remains deafening. No plaques, no memorials, no official recognition. It is as though the convoy never existed, erased from the ledger of history. Yet the fragments, intercepted signals, redacted files, survivor whispers, speak of a deliberate disappearance, a vanishing orchestrated under the shadow of defeat. Thousands of lives lost, not by torpedo or mine, but by the quiet hand of secrecy. And in that silence, the unanswered question persists. What was so valuable, so damning, that entire ships and their passengers could be sacrificed to ensure it would never surface? Until the archives yield more, Convoy 550 remains one of the Baltic's most chilling mysteries, a ghost fleet swallowed not by the sea, but by history itself. Chapter 2. Gestapo File. Number 17. The Oranienburg Experiments. Among the ruins of Berlin in 1945, Allied officers sifted through the debris of ministries, barracks, and hidden archives. Inside one battered cabinet within the wreckage of the Reich Security main office, a file marked Geheime Staatspolizei Nummer 17 was recovered. The Gestapo file, though partially burned and water damaged, contained chilling records from Sachsenhausen-Oranienburg concentration camp. Unlike the well-documented atrocities of other camps, these notes referenced a covert medical program overseen by SS Sturmbannführer Dr. Helmut Kranz. His assignment, concealed under the codename Project Morgenrot or Project Dawn, was not directed at extermination, but at the physiological manipulation of the human body for military endurance. The victims were Soviet POWs, Polish resistance fighters, and unnamed political prisoners, all erased from camp rolls. The objective: to test hypothermia, survival serums, and altitude tolerance for Luftwaffe pilots flying high-altitude missions over the Eastern Front. The experiments described were methodical and brutal. Prisoners were stripped naked and submerged in ice-filled tanks, while their pulse, respiration, and brain activity were recorded with crude electrodes. Some were injected with compounds derived from Soviet biochemical notes seized during Operation Barbarossa. Others were forced to breathe through experimental oxygen apparatus at simulated altitudes exceeding 40,000 feet. Death was not considered a failure, but rather a data point. A note attributed to Kranz reads, "Subject expired after 23 minutes, pulmonary collapse noted. Serum batch B12 ineffective. Recommend adjustment with compound from Tokyo. Shipment." This Tokyo shipment raises disturbing implications of collaboration between Nazi doctors and Japan's infamous Unit 731, Japanese. Diplomats had established a presence in Berlin, and there is evidence that scientific exchanges occurred under diplomatic cover. The Gestapo file hints at such collaboration, though the specifics remain locked in fragments of correspondence deliberately destroyed before the Red Army reached Berlin. Oranienburg was no ordinary site. It stood just 35 kilometers from the Reich capital, making it easily accessible to SS leaders and medical inspectors. Prisoner testimonies collected after the war describe barracks converted into laboratories, their windows blacked out, guarded not by ordinary camp watchmen, but by men from the SS Medical Corps. One survivor, a Polish doctor forced to assist, recounted hearing screams muffled by thick walls, followed by the mechanical hum of refrigeration units running day and night. He claimed that bodies were often removed not to crematoria but to sealed trucks marked with the initials Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the Reich Air Ministry. These accounts remained buried until the 1960s, when West German prosecutors briefly reopened investigations into Nazi medical crimes. Yet, once again, no indictment of Kranz followed. American OSS officers were aware of these files before the Soviets captured the area. Fragments of Gestapo file number 17 appeared in OSS research and analysis reports dated July 1945, with references to cold endurance trials, Sachsenhausen. Yet after the war, many of these documents were transferred into the custody of US Army intelligence under Operation Paperclip. The purpose was clear. Medical data derived from human suffering, though tainted by atrocity, was still considered of strategic value in the dawning Cold War. By 1947, Kranz's name disappears from records altogether. His absence from the Nuremberg doctors' trial has never been satisfactorily explained. While lesser figures such as Dr. Karl Brandt and Dr. Hertha Oberhäuser stood before the tribunal, Kranz was absent, his name unspoken. Survivors who asked about him were told he had perished in the chaos of Berlin, yet no body was found. Soviet authorities also seized portions of the Oranienburg archives. A KGB internal memorandum from 1951, declassified in the 1990s, references Nazi medical protocols from Oranienburg transferred to Institute No. 160. This institute, based in Moscow, was engaged in biological research for the Red Army. The document suggests that at least some of Kranz's findings on hypothermia were integrated into Soviet survival training programs for pilots and Arctic divisions. Yet Soviet propaganda remained silent about this origin, preferring to portray all Nazi experiments as barbaric pseudoscience. The contradiction reveals a darker truth. Both East and West may have quietly exploited the results while denying the victims recognition. The file's most damning pages reference collaboration meetings in late 1943 between Kranz and Colonel Ishii representatives. This likely points to Shiro Ishii, the notorious commander of Unit 731 in Manchuria, whose own experiments rivaled Nazi brutality. Though no direct meeting is documented, the existence of intermediaries in Berlin suggests data exchange was facilitated under the Tripartite Pact. If confirmed, it would mean that the Axis powers shared not only weapons and technology, but also human experimentation results. Such exchanges may explain why Allied interrogations of captured Japanese scientists after 1945 often referenced German precedents. The ethical void of these experiments is compounded by the silence that followed. When American senators reviewed paperclip transfers in the 1950s, the subject of Nazi medical records was deliberately minimized. Dr. Helmut Kranz's name appears one final time in a CIA personnel index from 1952, under an alias linked to aerospace medical research in Texas. The entry is blacked out in later releases, but its existence raises unsettling questions about how far the US was willing to go to secure an advantage against the Soviets. If true, it would mean that a man responsible for lethal experiments at Oranienburg lived out his days, not as a fugitive, but as a contributor to American aviation medicine. For the victims, recognition came late, if at all. Survivors who testified in West German courts in the 1960s described procedures consistent with hypothermia studies, yet prosecutors cited insufficient evidence to proceed. The Gestapo file number 17 was declared incomplete, with key sections lost. Families of the disappeared prisoners received no compensation, their loved ones listed only as deceased in Sachsenhausen. The file itself remained classified until fragments resurfaced in the 1990s through accidental declassification of US Army Medical Corps records. Even then, names and details were heavily redacted. The Oranienburg experiments represent more than a footnote to the horrors of Nazi medicine. They reveal a web of collaboration, cover-ups, and post-war exploitation that transcends simple notions of guilt and justice. Both superpowers had incentives to bury the full story. For the Soviets, it meant concealing their use of stolen data. For the Americans, it meant shielding paperclip scientists from prosecution. For the victims, it meant silence. The truth lies scattered across burned pages, vanished testimonies, and coded references in intelligence files. What remains undeniable is that within the walls of Oranienburg, under the shadow of the Reich's collapse, men like Helmut Kranz pursued science stripped of morality, reducing human beings to disposable instruments. That legacy was never properly confronted, and Gestapo file number 17 remains one of the most disturbing reminders of how knowledge can be born from cruelty and then hidden by those who benefit from it. Chapter 3. Operation Iron Wolf in the Carpathians. In the late summer of 1944, as the Red Army pressed relentlessly westward and the Reich teetered on collapse, fragments of intelligence began surfacing about a covert mission in the Carpathian Mountains. Soviet documents declassified in 1997 first revealed its name, Operation Eisenwolf, or Iron Wolf. It was a code name whispered in the diaries of field officers, scattered across partially intact German records, and eventually confirmed by captured orders attributed to SS Obergruppenführer Hans Kammler, the man entrusted with the Reich's most secretive engineering projects. Unlike traditional rearguard actions, Iron Wolf was never designed to repel Soviet troops. Instead, it was a mission to bury the Reich's future beneath stone and earth. Looted treasure, uranium or mined from occupied Czechoslovakia, blueprints for advanced aircraft, and evidence of research the Allies were never meant to find. The Carpathians, with their jagged ridges, mist-filled valleys, and labyrinthine cave systems, provided the perfect vault. Wehrmacht engineering battalions, reinforced by Totenkopf units, sealed cavern complexes with explosives, creating what official documents called Notlager, emergency storage sites. Local villagers spoke of entire convoys arriving under the cover of night, trucks bearing crates marked with wolf insignias, guarded by SS men who shot anyone approaching. Survivors of the massacres later testified that whole villages were erased to silence witnesses. Soviet partisan reports, filed by the 4th Ukrainian Front, noted strange demolitions in the mountains, accompanied by sightings of engineers carrying surveying equipment rather than rifles. These reports were dismissed at the time as exaggerations. Only decades later did fragments of the truth surface in the dusty corners of Moscow's military archives. One of the most chilling details lies in a document marked OKW Geheim, 17 October 1944, ordering the immediate transfer of uranium oxide and V-Waffen, blueprints to secure mountain locations in Ruthenia. The order bears Kammler's signature and includes a handwritten note, "For the Reich of tomorrow." That phrase became the anchor of speculation that Iron Wolf was less about hiding stolen wealth and more about ensuring that a post-war resurgence of Nazism would have the means to rise again. The Red Army's advance was unstoppable, but time still allowed for secrecy. Explosives sealed the caverns, maps were destroyed, witnesses eliminated. The wolf retreated into the mountains, leaving no trace but silence. When Soviet troops eventually occupied the Carpathians, they noted the ruins of villages and the presence of unusual blast craters. Engineers from the 1st Guards Army surveyed the sites but found only collapsed stone and twisted steel doors buried under tons of rock. A classified NKVD report from February 1945 recorded possible enemy depots concealed with precision. Yet Moscow ordered these files suppressed. The reason? Some depots were allegedly opened, and the materials seized were too valuable to acknowledge. One officer's diary describes crates marked with Reich eagles containing metallic powder of high density, almost certainly uranium ore. Another entry mentions aerodynamic schematics for aircraft with swept wings, predating known German jet designs. Such discoveries would later align suspiciously with advances in Soviet atomic and aeronautical research during the early Cold War. The West also took notice. After the war, CIA officers monitoring Eastern Europe received scattered reports of wolf bunkers in the mountains of Transcarpathia. A 1952 CIA assessment, declassified in 2005, references persistent rumors of German treasure and documents concealed in Carpathian tunnels, pursued by both Soviet and local partisan elements. The report concludes that the Soviets had already secured the most valuable caches. Yet by the 1960s, expeditions led by both amateur treasure hunters and alleged intelligence operatives surfaced across Slovakia and Ukraine. Many ended mysteriously, expeditions that vanished, deaths attributed to rock slides, or arrests by secret police. In one instance, a Polish geologist exploring near Rakiv was detained by the KGB for illegal surveying, and his notebooks were never returned to his family. The legend of Operation Iron Wolf became a Cold War ghost story. Villagers spoke of cursed tunnels where no birds sang, of heavy stone doors bearing wolf insignias unearthed by floods, only to disappear again. Satellite reconnaissance conducted by US intelligence in the 1970s even flagged anomalies in the Carpathians, symmetrical depressions consistent with collapsed tunnels. Files remain redacted, but one 1976 memorandum from the Defense Intelligence Agency states, Soviets continue to restrict access to certain Carpathian zones, likely presence of German-era installations. This acknowledgement, though couched in cautious language, suggests Washington remained suspicious of hidden Iron Wolf sites 3 decades after the war. The human cost of Iron Wolf was immense. Local resistance members recalled mass executions in late 1944. Villagers in Zakarpattia Oblast testified to entire hamlets being erased, their populations driven into barns and burned alive by SS units to prevent rumors of the convoys from spreading. These atrocities were later dismissed in Soviet war crimes trials as generic reprisals. Only through oral histories collected in the 1990s did the specific link to Iron Wolf emerge. Survivors described seeing SS engineers dynamiting mountainsides, then leaving behind fields of rubble marked with fresh blood from those who resisted. The secrecy was total. Death was the penalty for curiosity. One of the most haunting elements of Iron Wolf lies in what was never found. Despite decades of research, no complete cache has been recovered. Treasure hunters occasionally claim to discover Nazi gold or crates of weapons in the Carpathians, but none have been verified. The deliberate silence of both Soviet and Western archives suggests something far larger than treasure. Was Iron Wolf a repository of technology, the blueprints of a Reich intended to rise again under new masters? Or was it merely a desperate attempt to conceal stolen wealth from inevitable defeat? The absence of evidence may itself be evidence of success. The operation did what it was meant to do, burying the truth beyond recovery. Today, scattered fragments remain, the Kamler orders, Soviet intelligence notes, CIA assessments. Together, they paint a picture of a mission more calculated than any battlefield maneuver. Iron Wolf was not about fighting, but about hiding, ensuring that the Reich's most dangerous secrets would not fall into enemy hands. Yet the secrecy became so effective that even history itself has struggled to uncover the operation's full scale. The Carpathians hold their silence, the wolf still lurking beneath rock and soil, its caches waiting, or perhaps already plundered by those who will never admit it. And so Operation Iron Wolf endures, not as a relic of war but as an unfinished file, marked classified on both sides of the Iron Curtain, a shadow cast over mountains where truth remains sealed in stone. Chapter 4. The disappearance of U-boat U-547. Official German records state that U-547, a Type 1C-40 submarine, was lost to British mines near the Bay of Biscay in November 1944. Kriegsmarine archives list it as sunk with all hands, its location recorded as approximate, unconfirmed. Allied naval reports echoed this version, noting probable mine detonation. But when researchers cross-examined these accounts decades later, contradictions emerged. The submarine had been outfitted with advanced snorkel systems, allowing prolonged submerged operations, and it had received special orders marked only as Sonderauftrag, special mission. Intercepted Abwehr communications hinted that the boat was not destined for ordinary patrol, but instead carried sealed cargo destined for neutral ports in Franco-West Spain. Testimonies from captured U-boat crewmen added to the mystery. Some claim to have sighted U-547 refueling at sea weeks after its supposed destruction. Others recalled whispered rumors of the Ghost Boat, a vessel operating under orders outside the chain of command. U-547 had a history steeped in secrecy. Commissioned in 1943, it was among the larger long-range submarines capable of operating far beyond the Atlantic. By mid-1944, however, its patrol logs grew irregular. Entries from September and October suggest unusual stops at Lorient and Bordeaux, bases controlled directly by the Kriegsmarine High Command. Witnesses recalled crates being loaded onto the vessel under armed guard, their markings unfamiliar, some bearing Reich Eagles without unit designations, others stenciled simply with Sonderfracht. The crew was forbidden from asking questions. An engineering officer later testified during British interrogation that the crates were unusually heavy, requiring multiple men to shift. He believed they contained not munitions, but documents or materials of scientific origin. His statement was dismissed and buried in Admiralty files for decades. British intelligence tracked U-boat activity rigorously by late 1944, but no Allied signals intercepts confirm U-547's destruction. Instead, gaps appear in monitoring logs between November 12th and November 20th, precisely when the submarine was recorded as lost. A declassified 1946 Admiralty note reads, "No wreckage sighted. No survivors. Position remains speculative." Meanwhile, Spanish naval records, briefly opened in the 1970s, included references to an unregistered submarine docking near Cadiz in late 1944. Though the entry was vague, the timing aligns with U-547's disappearance. If accurate, it suggests the vessel evaded Allied patrols and reached Iberian waters, possibly offloading its cargo under cover of Francoist neutrality. Spain, though officially non-belligerent, maintained covert ties with Berlin and acted as a transit point for fleeing Nazis. Several high-ranking officials used Spain as a staging ground before escaping to South America. The Soviets, too, noted irregularities. A 1953 GRU naval report, declassified after the collapse of the USSR, mentions Kriegsmarine submarine unaccounted for, possible transfer to neutral custody. The report speculated that the vessel may have delivered uranium compounds or technical archives. This mirrors accounts from other U-boat missions, such as U-234, which carried uranium oxide toward Japan before surrendering to US forces. If U-547 carried similar material, it would explain the obsession with erasing its trail. No Allied power admitted seizing such cargo from U-547. No wreck was ever identified. Yet scattered intelligence hints that whatever it carried was recovered and hidden. Captured U-boat officers gave conflicting statements. One sailor claimed in 1946 that he heard of a phantom transfer involving U-547 near the Canary Islands, where neutral Spanish ships allegedly met the submarine under escort. Another officer described hearing rumors that the vessel had been deliberately scuttled after its cargo was offloaded. The crew dispersed under false identities. Interrogators dismissed these accounts as hearsay, but the consistency of details across multiple testimonies is troubling. Admiralty reports acknowledging these interrogations remain redacted in parts even today. Why redact if the submarine was simply lost to mines? The Cold War deepened the mystery. CIA files from the early 1950s, released under the Freedom of Information Act decades later, mention persistent unverified reports of a Kriegsmarine submarine transporting advanced weapons data to neutral hands. While the name U-547 is absent, the timing aligns. The files speculate that German assets may have attempted to negotiate with Allied or neutral governments using such cargo as leverage. Franco's Spain, Argentina under Perón, and even Portugal's Estado Novo were named as potential recipients. These nations were known havens for Nazi fugitives, their ports gateways for clandestine traffic across the Atlantic. By the 1960s, treasure hunters and historians alike sought evidence of U-547's fate. Expeditions in the Bay of Biscay yielded no wreck matching its profile. Spanish archives remained sealed, while German naval historians quietly acknowledged discrepancies in its official loss report. One researcher, Dr. Klaus Ritter, claimed in a 1974 paper that the submarine never sank where reported. He argued that falsified records were created by the Kriegsmarine itself, masking the vessel's true mission. Shortly after publishing his theory, Ritter's funding was cut, and he was dismissed from his academic post. His paper vanished from circulation, surviving only in fragments cited by later researchers. To this day, the fate of U-547 is unresolved. Was it destroyed by mines as officially claimed, or did it slip into neutral harbors, offloading a cargo of immense value before vanishing into deliberate obscurity? If the latter, what became of its crew? Did they die in silence, or were they absorbed into post-war escape networks like Odessa? The answers remain buried in redacted files and sealed archives. Without a wreck, without confirmation, U-547 lingers as one of the most enigmatic ghosts of the Atlantic War. A submarine officially lost, yet possibly still remembered by those who ensured its story was never meant to surface. The silence of the Bay of Biscay tells one story, but the whispers in intelligence files tell another, and between them lies a secret guarded not by the sea, but by history's refusal to speak. The war ended in 1945, but the archives never stopped whispering. Convoys vanished into fog without wreckage. Files surfaced only to disappear again. Caves in the Carpathians were sealed with dynamite, and submarines recorded as sunk may have instead slipped away to neutral harbors, carrying cargoes that reshaped the Cold War. The official history of the Second World War tells of Allied victory and Axis defeat, yet beneath it lies another layer, fragments of operations so secret that their traces were deliberately erased. The Wilhelm Gustloff tragedy remains a headline, but Convoy 550 is a blank page. Nuremberg judged many doctors guilty, yet the name of Helmut Krantz never crossed the tribunal floor. Kammler's Iron Wolf was buried under mountains, but its shadow stretches across Soviet and American research alike. And U-547, the submarine supposedly swallowed by mines, continues to haunt naval records with its absence. These are not legends, nor fabrications. They are the scars left by deliberate silence. Scars etched into files stamped most secret, Geheime Reichssache, and classified. Each unanswered question is a reminder that wars do not end when treaties are signed. They linger in archives, in unmarked graves, in sealed bunkers, and in oceans that will not yield their dead. Somewhere, hidden in the silence of governments and the depths of history, lie the full answers to these mysteries. Until they surface, we are left with fragments, echoes, and the chilling realization that some truths were never meant to be known.